Welcome on behalf of the United States Studies Center at the University of Sydney. I'm really delighted to invite you and to welcome you to our inaugural Sydney International Strategy Forum. I'm Mike Green, the CEO of the center, and I'll tell you a bit about our plan for the day. Let me first begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and also acknowledge the First Nation people from the United States, from Canada, and from countries also represented here today. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We're going to talk today about the Indo-Pacific, the United States, Australia, Japan, Canada, and other allies and partners in a more contested and uncertain environment. We are calling this the Sydney International Strategy Forum. So you will hear updates from some of the leading experts from the United States, Australia, Japan, on what is happening in geopolitics, in emerging technology, in trade policy, and geoeconomics. You'll hear those updates, but we called this the Strategy Forum because it's our hope that on the panels and in the discussions at the tables and afterwards, we are setting up a framework for a strategic discussion, not just about what's happening, but what like-minded countries can do about it. And this is the theory of impact we're trying to develop at the U.S. Studies Center. We have, for 15 years at the center, provided analysis of the U.S.-Australia alliance, and the Indo-Pacific, insights for government. We're focusing in particular now and have updated our banners to include a third line, which is working on solutions for the alliance. So we, for example, have done extensive studies. Some of you in the room have participated on financing Pillar 2 of AUKUS, where we've had representatives from private equity and venture capital firms, from tech firms, from defense, from the White House, brainstorming about how to open up more resources for innovation in the defense sector. We've had what might have been mind-numbing, but were actually pretty interesting roundtables on ITAR and American export controls, work on the energy transition. John Hamre, my old boss at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, like to say that the problems of the world are increasingly becoming horizontal, and disrespecting the vertical cylinders that are the historic and traditional constructs of companies and governments and international institutions and think tanks and forums like this can sometimes play a helpful role working across the horizontal, working across traditional domains or bureaucratic lines or national lines, bringing people together from different stakeholder communities to start looking for practical solutions, because many of the challenges we face don't respect the organizational chart of the U.S. or Australian governments. So that's what we try to do in our work now, and that's what we'll try to do today, and that's the essence of grand strategy. Strategy is ultimately about having to reconcile two contradictory objectives. We want an energy transition where we give incentives from government to spur innovation and investment, but we also want prosperity. We want to protect technology, but we want growth. We want a productive relationship with China, but we want security. The issue set today is replete with mutually contradictory objectives that the U.S., Australia, Japan, and other friends and allies are trying to navigate. So we look forward to that. We're the U.S. Studies Center, but we sometimes call ourselves the U.S., UK, Japan, Canada, NATO, Korea, a Quad AUKUS Studies Center. My staff wouldn't let me change the acronym, so we're still the U.S. Studies Center, but we're very focused on building those conversations with allies and partners. And for that reason, we are delighted to have some distinguished guests with us today, including the High Commissioner from Canada, Mark Rausser. Welcome, Mark. The Japanese Consul General, Shuichi Tokuda. Tokuda-san, welcome. The British Consul General and Deputy Trade Commissioner Louise Marie Cantillon, and the Canadian Consul and Senior Trade Commissioner Sarah Quigley. Delighted you can join us. We promise when the American, Japanese, and Australian speakers conclude their remarks, we won't pass all the homework to the UK and Canada and Japan. We have 4 panels which will range across the issues confronting the region in economic security diplomacy. We'll also take a very close look at the U.S. political system. One reason the U.S. Studies Center exists is because the United States itself is a big variable in all this. We'll try to make sense of it. We have some polling data we've just produced to help. In the first part of the program, we'll turn to that polling, and my colleagues will show you our results. And then we will look at U.S.-China competition. Michelle Flournoy, former Undersecretary of Defense, who I'll introduce, will frame the discussion for us, and then I'll invite Admiral Phil Davidson, former commander of Indo-PACOM, and Dr. Evan Medeiros, colleague at Georgetown and former senior director for Asia at the NSC, and the Honorable Kim Beasley to join us for a panel discussion on where U.S.-China competition is going. We'll then turn to domestic U.S. politics, a panel that will be moderated by the U.S. Studies Center's Victoria Cooper, with Ryan Lizza of Politico, Olivia Nuzzi of New York Magazine, Associate Professor David Smith of the Center and the University of Sydney, and Bruce Wolpe, one of our fellows, to try to, I cannot think of the right verb, to try to explain what's happening in American politics. We'll then turn after lunch to a panel on navigating the geopolitics of business in the Indo-Pacific, de-risking disruption, emerging technology. We have Michaela Browning from Google, John Kunkel from the U.S. Studies Center, and Haley Channer, and that will be moderated by Jared Monshine from the center. And then we'll come back to the allies and partners. We'll have a panel discussion on AUKUS, the Quad, the U.S., Japan, Australia trilateral security dialogue, and the future of our alliances and partnerships with Representative Aki Nagashima from the National Diet of Japan, former National Security Advisor, Professor Peter Dean from the Center, Dr. Zach Cooper from the American Enterprise Institute, and Dr. Grana Grkic from the University of Sydney and the Center. We also have keynote addresses for you. The Minister for Resources and Minister for Northern Australia, just back from the state visit in the United States, the Honorable Madeleine King. We have Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs and Leader of the Opposition in the Senate, the Honorable Simon Birmingham. And as I said, we'll hear from Michelle Flournoy with our first keynote to frame up the strategic issues. But what I want to do first is start with U.S. politics, which will infuse our discussion all day. And our surveys, which we have done at the Center for some time, and there are some really very good surveys. The Lowy Institute survey I've long found helpful, Gallup and the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. They're each a bit different. They give you different insights. Our survey the last 2 years has focused on the American, Japanese, and Australian public, looking at attitudes on each other, on China and the Indo-Pacific, but also probing a bit more on some of the issues we'll be talking about today. Taiwan, technology de-risking, and so forth. And to give you our findings, which I believe are on the tables, if you want to read the full report, I want to invite our research director, Jared Monshine, and research editor, Victoria Cooper, who will walk through what we found the American, Australian, and Japanese people think about the topics we'll be discussing today. Thank you.